I am Clara Whitmore, 29 years old, and despite running a multi-million-dollar tech company, I still take the subway to work. My parents never understood my choice to live simply, especially when I showed up to our annual family dinner in jeans while my cousins arrived in designer armor. When Julian smirked and asked if I was still riding with the masses, I didn't expect my quiet, antique watch to catch my father's eye. The look on his face changed everything that night. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I silenced a room full of status-obsessed relatives with just a flick of my wrist. I grew up as the daughter of Edward and Lila Whitmore, where success was measured in square footage and last names carved into limestone. Father built a real estate empire from a modest inheritance. Mother came from old money, the kind that funds wings of museums and disperses opinions like family heirlooms. They loved me, but our house was upholstered with expectations, elite schools, tasteful summers, strategic friendships. You didn't merely live a Whitmore life, you curated it. And yet, I was the outlier who liked spreadsheets more than silk, problems more than parties. At 17, I skipped a European summer to intern, unpaid, at a startup incubator. My cousins called it phase poverty. My parents called it a detour. After Harvard Business School, the script was pre-written: take a six-figure offer at Whitmore & Company, acquire a corner office and a chauffeured sedan, and perform competence for the board. I declined. I joined a struggling tech firm downtown as a junior analyst in a room that smelled like solder and burnt coffee. The chaos suited me. Ideas clattered across whiteboards, engineers argued at 1 a.m. over 3 lines of code, victories were small and unphotogenic, the kind that never make Instagram but build a spine. Within 18 months I was a product manager, and in one particularly combative meeting, a silver-haired advisor watched me ask questions that made the room go quiet. His name was Henry Calloway, soft voice, sharp mind, corduroy jacket with frayed elbows. He had founded and exited more companies than most people can list, and somehow he remained allergic to spectacle. He drove an old sedan that coughed at red lights and tipped waitresses like a man who remembered what it meant to need money. Real success is invisible, he told me over diner pancakes, steam fogging the window. The moment you feel a need to display it, you've already traded substance for ceremony. The sentence landed in me like a stake driven straight and true. 2 years later our little firm was acquired. I took the buyout, rented a smaller apartment than anyone in my family would consider humane, and founded Callaway Dynamics, named for the man who taught me to invert the usual metrics. Henry didn't just invest first, he showed up with soup when I fell asleep in the office, reminded me that a product isn't a pitch deck, and ignored the month's burn rate long enough to ask whether our work would still matter in 10 years. Those first years were a grind of fluorescent lights and quiet terror. I poured every cent back into the company. When investors got jumpy, Henry didn't. When I doubted myself, he called. When the numbers looked like a cliff, he said, "Look again. It's a ramp. Now push." On my 27th birthday he gave me a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a watch, modest to the untrained eye, spare and beautiful to anyone who understood design. "I made a handful of these before the world started calling me a tech guy," he said, fastening the leather around my wrist. It kept me honest when money got loud. Wear it when you forget who you are, or when other people try to tell you. 3 months later, Henry died of a heart attack. I learned that grief is a second language you never wanted to speak. The watch became a translation device. It told time, yes, but it also told why. Callaway Dynamics grew. We weren't a rocket ship, we were a freight train, heavy, steady, impossible to stop once momentum built. We signed clients others overlooked, then clients others coveted. We opened a small office overseas. Journalists called, and I rarely answered. Our valuation crept into headlines I didn't forward to my mother. I still lived in my one bedroom, I still took the subway. The watch stayed under my sleeve. My extended family remained blissfully incurious. They performed success loudly, Amelia with her infinity pool selfies, Justin with his rotating fleet of cars and rotating definitions of humility, my Aunt Pamela with Italian marble as both noun and verb. At dinners, they held court about couture waitlists and equity events, and I held my water glass and asked the caterers about their scheduling software. The Whitmore dinner is a ritual, an annual recitation of acquisition disguised as togetherness. It happens at the Westchester estate, carved stone, clipped hedges, a driveway long enough to host opinions. Upon arrival, guests arrange their vehicles for maximum noticeability, which is a word my family believes exists. Last year I took a train and a rideshare. This year I planned the same, a book in my bag, composure in my pocket, the watch on my wrist like a secret syllable. Only one thing would be different, my father had learned to read the watch. A few weeks earlier, a trade publication ran a small, reverent feature about Callaway's early designs. There was a black and white photograph, Henry at a workbench, magnifier over one eye, the outline of this watch in the frame. My father, who collects mechanical things with histories, clipped the article. He never mentioned it, the way he never mentioned the quarterly filings he somehow always saw, but during a quick coffee near his office he asked, offhand, whether I still wore that old piece Henry liked. Yes, I said, rolling my sleeve. The leather had molded to my skin. Father stared a fraction too long, then nodded as if filing away a shape. We went back to talking about weather and tenants and how the city was a living organism that preferred to be misunderstood. Now the invitation to dinner sat heavy on my kitchen counter. The card smelled faintly of money and lavender. Black tie optional, it read, which in Whitmore vocabulary means mandatory. I set it under a paperweight and finished answering emails. There was a late call with a clinic network we were onboarding, then a Slack thread about an edge case and a misbehaving data pipeline. At 1:07 a.m. I watered a plant that refuses to die and thought about the silent economy of the watch, precision without pretense, craft without chorus. On the afternoon of the dinner, the sky was winter clear and unsentimental. I wore dark jeans, a silk blouse, flat shoes that knew the city. I slipped on a coat, checked that my Metro card still had value, and reached for my keys. My phone buzzed. Julian had posted a story from a dealership, captioned, "Welcome home, baby." There was chrome where there could have been character. I put the phone face down and laughed once, softly. On the train, city life performed itself, teenagers choreographing joy between stops, a nurse closing her eyes for 3 blessed minutes, a man in a suit reading a paperback with ripped corners. I watched our reflections slide across dark glass like a moving confession. The watch ticked, indifferent to spectacle. By the time the rideshare rolled past the iron gates, dusk had turned the house into a catalog photograph of itself. The circular drive glittered with cars wedged at angles of intention. Through the salon windows I saw crystal flashing and people shining and conversations already rehearsed. I thanked the driver, stepped out into air that smelled like pine and expensive ambition, and adjusted my sleeve. Inside, there would be gowns and jokes and little knives hid inside compliments. There would be Julian's smile, my aunt's pity, my mother's careful choreography, and my father somewhere near the fireplace, watching everything without moving much at all. And before the soup hit the table, his gaze would settle, slowly, curiously, on the quiet thing around my wrist. That was the moment I didn't plan for. That was the moment everything would start to tilt. The Whitmore estate has always felt more like a museum than a home. Marble floors polished to a shine that discourages footsteps, chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, portraits of ancestors staring down with measured disdain. Even as a child I tiptoed here, careful not to smudge the illusion of perfection. Tonight, as I handed my coat to the butler, that same sensation washed over me, though now it was mixed with something sharper, something almost like amusement. "Miss Clara, welcome," said Mr. Simmons, the longtime steward of my parents' house. His eyes softened, betraying the warmth his posture could not. "Good to see you, Simmons," I replied, genuine. "How's your daughter?" "Starting her residency in pediatrics, thanks to the essay help you gave her," he said, almost shyly. "She still talks about that afternoon." The pride in his voice was worth more to me than every Rolex on the wrists assembled tonight. From the salon drifted the familiar chorus, champagne laughter, glass against glass, names of brands used like adjectives. I inhaled once, adjusted my blouse, and stepped into the performance. The first voice to reach me was, of course, Julian's. "Well, if it isn't our minimalist cousin," he announced, arms wide, smile curated for maximum audience. His suit was tailored within an inch of its life, a silver tie clip winking in the chandelier's light. "Hello, Julian," I said, offering the polite smile I reserve for moments when the truth would cause combustion. "Still refusing to upgrade from public transport?" His question floated across the room, received with chuckles from those orbiting him. "It's reliable," I said simply. "And I rather like seeing the city above ground and below." His laugh was too loud, his eyes flicking to the others to ensure they joined. He didn't notice the way my father, across the room, paused in mid-sentence to watch us. My mother intercepted me next. Clara Whitmore, elegant in a floor-length gown that probably cost more than the salaries of half the staff working tonight. She air-kissed both cheeks, then let her gaze sweep over me like an appraiser. "You could have worn the gown I sent you for your birthday, darling," she murmured. "It would have been perfect for tonight." "This is comfortable," I replied, hugging her properly, which she returned with a stiffness that betrayed disapproval. "At least the blouse is silk," she sighed, already pulling me toward a cluster of relatives. "Come, you must hear about Julian's promotion. Youngest partner in the firm's history." Of course. Julian's achievements arrived first, like hors d'oeuvres delivered before the main course. The salon was a theater of wealth. Cousin Amelia described a villa in Capri with breathless gestures, her diamond bracelets caught the light like punctuation. Justin, another cousin, boasted about his new Porsche, while Aunt Pamela explained the tragedy of finding competent contractors for her Hamptons renovation. The air smelled faintly of perfume, privilege, and competition. I made my rounds, greeted politely, nodded at updates about mergers and markets. My answers were short, designed to take up little space. It was easier that way, to exist as the family eccentric, the odd cousin who had traded penthouses for practicality. They pitied me, but pity is a cloak that lets you move unnoticed. Dinner was announced, and we drifted into the dining hall, a long mahogany table gleaming with crystal, china, and enough silverware to confuse a diplomat. Place cards dictated proximity, and naturally mine placed me between Julian and Amelia. The perfect positioning for comparison. The first course arrived, scallops with a citrus glaze, artfully arranged. Conversation rose like a tide. "Amelia, darling, that necklace!" Aunt Pamela exclaimed. "New," Amelia replied, touching it with faux modesty. "A little gift from Leonardo after we closed on the villa." "Spectacular," my mother breathed. Across the table, Uncle Richard dabbed his lips and announced loudly, "Julian was instrumental in our latest acquisition. $2 billion added to the portfolio. We're expanding Pacific Holdings next quarter." Applause, nods, a chorus of admiration. Julian blushed on cue, murmuring something about "just doing my job," though his eyes darted to me for reaction. I smiled politely, then cut into my scallop. "Clara," Julian said suddenly, voice pitched to carry. "And how is the entrepreneurial adventure?" He swirled his Bordeaux, waiting for the spectacle of my answer. "Still working out of that little co-working space?" "We moved last year," I replied evenly. "Into our own offices." "Oh? In Soho?" "Flatiron." He whistled. "Pricey neighborhood. For a modest team, isn't it? How many employees now?" "Still just you and 2 engineers?" "More than that." I took a sip of water. Julian smirked. "Well, startups are a gamble. 90% collapse within the year. The fact that you've lasted this long is, honestly, impressive." Aunt Pamela leaned closer, her tone sweetened with condescension. "Darling, if it becomes too much, your father could always find you a stable position. Security is not shameful, you know." She patted my hand as though I were recovering from illness. "That's kind," I said, keeping my smile neutral. "But we're managing." Managing, Julian echoed, with the same tone one uses for toddlers learning to walk. The courses arrived and disappeared: salmon, salad, something involving truffle foam. Conversation never shifted far from possessions: Madison's brownstone renovation, Justin's Saudi deal, Amelia's villa plans. I listened, nodding. Gerald's, no, Henry's, watch ticking quietly beneath my sleeve. Then came the moment. Julian leaned back, fork tapping against his plate, voice pitched like a stage actor. So, Clara, you came by Uber tonight? Still taking the subway, too? The table went still. Eyes swiveled, some gleaming with amusement, others with pity. My mother's lips pressed thin, my aunt's hand fluttered dramatically to her pearls. For Julian, it was the perfect humiliation, his Ferrari parked outside, gleaming proof of victory. I opened my mouth, but before words formed, my father's voice cut through. Clara, he said slowly, eyes narrowed not at Julian, but at me. More precisely, at my wrist. The fork in his hand stopped midair. His gaze fixed on the edge of leather and steel slipping from beneath my cuff. His expression shifted: curiosity, recognition, then something like awe. Is that, his voice faltered. May I see your watch? Silence fell. Fork stilled. Even the waitstaff froze, sensing the pivot. Julian's smirk collapsed into confusion. Her watch? I extended my arm across the table. My father leaned forward, lifting his glasses to examine the piece with reverence. This is a Calloway original, he said softly. From the first collection. There were fewer than 50. Where did you? Henry gave it to me, I said quietly. The words detonated in the room. For a moment no one breathed. Aunt Pamela choked slightly on her wine. Amelia's eyes widened. Julian's mouth opened, then closed. My father sat back slowly, gaze sweeping the table. Do you all understand what this is worth? His voice carried not just authority, but a note of marvel. $2 million, at least. And more than its price, its provenance. Handmade by Calloway himself. I felt the weight of every stare, the entire architecture of the dinner tilting in a single moment. Julian swallowed, voice brittle. You, Henry Calloway, was your mentor? Yes, I said. The room shifted like tectonic plates, and for the first time in my life at this table, I was no longer invisible. How did you come by it? My father asked, voice careful, eyes still on the watch as though any sudden movement might disturb its balance. Henry gave it to me, I repeated, quieter. On my 27th birthday. Uncle Richard's eyebrows tugged together. Gave? Not loaned? Gave, I said. Aunt Pamela recovered her equilibrium enough to assume her favorite role, authority by tone. Well then, you really must keep it in a safe, dear. Such things are meant for vaults, not subways. Henry disagreed, I said. He told me beautiful tools should be used, not displayed. There was a whisper of linen as my father set down his napkin. He murmured, almost to himself, and then, louder, Clara, did you ever tell us you worked closely with Calloway? Several responses rose around the table at once. Wait, worked closely? Calloway is in. Is that the same man who? Julian tried to gather the tatters of his earlier triumph. And what exactly did this working closely entail? A workshop? A seminar? He smiled too broadly. A motivational podcast? I turned my water glass once between my fingers, then set it down. The room was listening with the curiosity reserved for gossip that might be expensive. Henry advised the first company I joined, I said. Later, he became my mentor. When I left after the acquisition, he was my first investor. Silence again, this time thicker. First investor, Uncle Richard repeated. How much? I looked at my father, not for permission, only to acknowledge that this was the moment we stopped pretending I was small. $500,000. On a handshake. Forks paused, a collective intake of breath. Even the chandelier seemed to lean in. That is not how these things are done, Aunt Pamela said faintly. It was how he did them, I said. When he'd already decided. My father's face had shifted into something I'd seen across conference tables: appraisal, pride, something like regret threaded through. And your company? He asked, gentler now. Callaway Dynamics, how far have you taken it? Across the table, Amelia had already fished out her phone, thumbs flying. Hold on, she breathed, eyes scanning. There's a feature, oh. Oh. All attention pivoted. What? Julian demanded. Amelia swallowed. There's an article. It says Callaway Dynamics closed a multi-agency modernization contract last month. 5 years. 900 million. My mother's champagne glass touched down too loudly. 900, Clara? I kept my tone even. We're implementing our platform across several departments. It will reduce redundancies, cut processing time, and save a lot of money. That's the point. Julian stared, the calculation behind his eyes suddenly visible. And your, valuation? Amelia, still scrolling, answered for me. Projected north of 2 billion, possibly 3 next quarter. Her voice flickered. Rumors of an IPO. Rumors, I said lightly. We build. We don't hype. My aunt recovered just enough to be indignant on behalf of propriety. But you live in that tiny apartment. And the subway? It's close to the office, I said. And the train works. Clara, my mother whispered, not unkindly, just bewildered. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to be treated the same when you thought I had less, I didn't say. Because the minute numbers enter a room, people stop seeing faces. Because Henry said visibility is a poor substitute for substance. Aloud, I said, it never came up. My father's mouth quirked. It came up tonight. Across his face moved an expression I wasn't prepared for: recognition, yes, and pride, but also the quiet relief of a man realizing his daughter had been steering her own ship with more precision than he dared to imagine. He lifted his glass toward me. To Callaway, then, he said softly. And to the people who learned to build without announcing it. A murmur of agreement rippled around the table, unsure, then stronger. Crystal touched crystal. Julian lifted his glass a heartbeat late. The main course arrived under silver domes. Conversation, having been knocked from its usual orbit, drifted strangely. Questions came wrapped in newfound respect and the faintest scent of opportunism. What exactly does your platform do? Uncle Richard probed. Predictive operations, I said. We model loads, bottlenecks, and demand, then optimize decisions. It looks boring on a slide and transformative in a budget. Fortune 500 clients, he pressed. A few, I said. Hospitals. Municipal networks. Agencies. My father smiled into his napkin. Translation, yes. Julian tried for camaraderie and landed in mimicry. And yet you keep it quiet. Some things grow better out of the sun, I said. A small laugh from further down the table, unexpectedly, from Madison, who has never laughed at anything that didn't wear a logo. That's actually good, she said, then looked startled by her own sincerity. Dessert was a sculpture of spun sugar and something citrus. No one tasted much of it. The dining room exhaled, and the crowd began to disassemble toward the library, where leather and bottles promised an easier kind of conversation. As chairs scraped back, my father caught my sleeve. 5 minutes? He asked. We stepped aside near the mantel while guests streamed past like a river around rocks. He looked not at the watch, but at me. I followed the filings, he admitted, voice low. I saw the trend lines. I suspected. But hearing it from you, watching them hear it, he shook his head once, half smiling. I should have asked sooner. You respected that I wasn't telling, I said. That, or I was a coward, he said lightly. Then, more serious, you built something with spine, Clara. Henry chose well. Something uncoiled in me, years of being politely underestimated sliding off like a shawl I'd outgrown. "Thank you," I said. It sounded insufficient and exactly right. From the doorway Julian watched us, a crease between his brows, as if recalibrating the geometry of a room he thought he'd measured. In the library the evening rearranged itself. People who used to speak through me now addressed me directly. Uncle Richard wanted market commentary. Aunt Pamela floated philanthropic introductions. Justin asked, far too casually, if our firm outsourced any trading analytics. "We do not." Amelia, who has 20,000 followers and 3 opinions, asked about internships for someone she knows, and looked embarrassed when I asked for a resume. My mother hovered, still processing, still a little lost. Eventually she came and sat beside me on a leather sofa that had seen more negotiations than holidays. "I'm proud of you," she said, and then, because she is who she is, "but we must do something about that apartment." I laughed, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "We can buy a rug," I said. "A very nice one. With tassels. You can choose it." She made a face, half relief, half exasperation, and patted my hand like we had forged a treaty. Later, when the room had thinned, Julian slid into the seat my mother vacated. He did not smirk. He did not project. He looked, for once, like a person rather than a performance. "I owe you an apology," he said. I waited. "I have been," he groped for a word that wouldn't bruise his image. "Dismissive. You've been theatrical about things that shine," I said. His smile flickered. "And you've been quiet about things that matter." He glanced at the watch, then away. "I thought the display was the success." "It's one kind," I said. "Not the kind that lasts." He nodded, swallowing a retort that would have come easily an hour ago. "Is it true," he asked after a beat, "what Amelia read? About the contract? About the valuation?" "It's true enough." He exhaled, a tight, almost laughless sound. "All this time I thought I was lapping you." "You were driving in circles," I said, not unkindly. "Very fast. In a very red car." He looked at his hands. "I might need to rethink a few things." "That's allowed," I said. "You're not a brand. You're a person." He nodded again, and for a moment, brief but real, we were the children we had been once, playing on the same lawn without keeping score. Mr. Simmons appeared by the doorway, a respectful distance. "Miss Clara, your car is here." "Thank you," I said, rising. My father intercepted me at the hall. "May I come by the office next week?" he asked. "I'd like to meet your team. See what you've built with my own eyes." "Anytime," I said, and meant it. At the front door, cold air reached in like a question. The night smelled of pine and frost and the faint metallic rush of something changing. I shrugged on my coat, then hesitated, turning back toward the library. Across the room, a guest I barely recognized, a friend of my uncle's, maybe, or a client, stood near the bar, phone angled low. His gaze was on my wrist, not my face. He snapped a photo before he realized I was looking at him. Our eyes met. He slid the phone into his jacket, expression blank. I opened my mouth, then closed it. The watch was warm against my skin, steady as a metronome. Outside, headlights cut a clean line through the dark. I stepped into the night and down the stone steps, aware of the new orbit the evening had set in motion, and of the way orbits can distort when someone puts another sun in the sky. Behind me, in the window's reflection, the party continued its shine. In front of me, the car door opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. I touched the watch once, the way you touch a word you don't want to forget. Then I slid into the seat, already wondering which would arrive first, my father's visit to the office, or the consequences of a stranger's photo finding the wrong pair of eyes.